expecting the Prime Minister to start a media conference from Townsville pretty soon. We'll endeavour to bring you that live. We're also expecting the Northern Territory Chief Minister and Police Commissioner to speak within the next half hour or so. Now, Indigenous Liberal MP Ken Wyatt has been speaking in Melbourne. Let's take a listen to what he's had to say about this announcement of the Royal Commission.
What did you make of 4Corners last night?
Actually, I watched the program and I sat there at the end of it stunned because it was something that I had always associated with Abu Dhabi or overseas imagery I'd seen of people in detention, but not here in Australia, particularly that young Dixon sitting in the chair constrained. No, I was angry. I certainly sent a text message to the Prime Minister, and then I spoke with Arthur Senadinos about the issue and the need for a national intervention. And then this morning I was in touch again with the Prime Minister.
And what has been the communication between yourself and the Prime Minister?
Well, actually, it's about the program. It was about the need to address the issue, and I complimented him this morning when I heard the announcement that we would have a Royal Commission to get to the underlying issues, the extent, and what the challenges are now in addressing this.
You alerted the Prime Minister when the program was on?
Well, I'm assuming the Prime Minister would have been watching, but I still sent a text message indicating that there was a need to watch 4Corners. He responded by saying he was watching it on iView, which meant that he hadn't seen the beginning of the program. But look, he's been very forthcoming. He, I know, was horrified by what he saw, and certainly his reaction has been swift, so I compliment the Prime Minister on his course of action. And I need to acknowledge the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, because he equally was embarrassed by what he had seen and had already instigated his own course of action, but in combining with the Prime Minister, now the Royal Commission will now investigate all the matters that we saw on 4Corners last night.
What were the alarm bells that were ringing for you as you watched the program?
I think the tear gas. When I saw the tear gas in particular and the way it was used, even on the children who were innocent and not involved in that whole event, being subjected to the same treatment, still being handcuffed and being hosed down. And then what really stunned me was watching that restraint chair and being hooded. I wouldn't like to sit for 2 hours with a hood over my face or over my head, because it closes in all sensory elements that you are used to having with your 5 senses. And that shocked me more than anything else. And the anger I felt within that we, as a first world nation, are doing this to Aboriginal kids in custody also begs the question, were there other children who weren't Indigenous that were subjected to the same processes that we saw last night on 4Corners?
How confident are you that these practices have been restricted to the Northern Territory?
Look, I look at the better good of systems. Every now and again we do have things that have gone wrong, particularly in WA when we had a couple of deaths that should never have happened, particularly an elder from the Goldfields region who died in the back of a prison van, Miss Jew, who died in custody because of the hospital treatment that was not given to her. These things are not acceptable, but they do happen. But when it's what appears to be systematic, even if it's one incident, it's not appropriate. We have an obligation to our young people, regardless of what ethnicity, and we have an obligation to make sure that they're safe, even in custody.
With what you saw last night, do you see the problem as being systematic and problems with procedures, or more about culture?
Look, I think it's probably a raft of those matters. Human nature will always be shaped and designed by the workforce we're in, our thinking and our own individual views towards a group of people or towards individuals. And sometimes you get caught up in that whole suite of a action that occurs, so you become part of a team. And that prevailed last night. But it's still not acceptable.
The Prime Minister says there will now be a Royal Commission. What sort of timeline is acceptable to get that up and running?
Look, I don't think we should set a timeline. It's got to be thorough. It has to look at the issues that need to be investigated. It's got to allow evidence to come forward. It's got to allow the Royal Commissioners to thoroughly examine whether it's systemic or whether it was a particular instance or incident, or whether there is training that is required, because in the program last night there was reference to better training needed. And if that's the case, then we also have to do that. But the behaviour is not acceptable.
Do you think it's specifically a problem in dealing with Indigenous people in custody?
Look, I'd like to say no, but I think in some instances it is the Indigenous factor, and it's not appropriate. We had a Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody many years ago, and they had recommendations in there as to what we needed to remedy as state and territory governments and as the Commonwealth Government. And you would expect things would have improved, but based on last night's program, in that instance, they didn't improve. In fact, they've gone backwards.
Anything you'd like to add?
Now, let's hope that the outcome causes all governments to look at what's happening within their jurisdictions, that we value the lives of all who are in any form of custody, and that we ensure that they are looked after. I know and I accept, as I often think about, some of the people that do commit crimes are often affected by alcohol or affected by drugs. And there is the safety of the people who are handling them, but it doesn't justify what I saw last night.
It appeared as though the relationships were based on hostility.
Well, based on the voices, there was a them and us. And in a sense, that's a pity, because there are ways we can handle aggressive people. And I know that's easy for me as a member of the Parliament to say I'm not working in that environment. But there has to be, within training, strategies that are given to people as to how to handle challenging and difficult individuals and better constrain them than what we saw last night. The use of tear gas on all of those young people, including those who weren't involved, I just find extraordinary.
Thank you very much for your time.
No, you're welcome.